Today we're going to read Magic Treehouse Merlin Missions number 22, Hurry Up Houdini, Chapter 6, Jolly Jack and the Amazing Annie. As the orchestra played, Mr. Wilson guided Jack and Annie through the backstage area. "Watch out, kids," he said. "Like I said before, it's a tough crowd out there tonight." Jack smiled confidently. "No crowd is too tough for us," he thought. Hank and Butch set the table with Jack and Annie's props center stage behind the closed curtain. The stage was lit with a soft, rosy light. "Places," called Mr. Wilson. Jack and Annie nodded and calmly took their places in front of the table. They heard a long drum roll, then a cymbal crash, like bang. And they heard Mr. Dewey speaking to the audience from in front of the curtain. "Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Great Houdini Show. I have a very special and wonderful surprise for you this evening. As you may know, the Bambini brothers were scheduled to be our opening act, but instead it will be your great fortune to welcome a truly remarkable pair of young illusionists." You know what illusionist mean? Somebody who can make things look like they're happening that they're not. It's like a magician. These master magicians have performed in theaters all around the world, and tonight they are here to perform for you. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you Jolly Jack and the Amazing Annie. A trumpet blasted, the curtain rose, and the crowd clapped and whistled as Jack and Annie stepped into a yellow spotlight. Looking out at the audience, Jack chuckled like a seasoned performer. His heart pounded, but not with fear. It pounded with an excitement that made him want to do his best. "Good evening, friends," Jack shouted over the applause. "They call me Jolly Jack because nothing brings me greater joy than entertaining folks like you. And they call my sister Amazing Annie because—" Jack held his gloved hand out toward Annie. "I love to amaze you with amazing ability to amaze you," Annie shouted. The cymbals crashed. The crowd laughed. "Do not let our youthful appearance fool you," Annie went on. "My brother and I have traveled the globe to discover mysteries both ancient and modern." Jack took off his top hat and turned it towards the crowd. "I direct your attention to my hat," he said. "As you can see, the inside is quite ordinary. But strange things happen with this hat, especially when I touch it with a wand given to us by an Arabian princess." Jack looked around. "Oh dear, I seem to have forgotten my wand." Annie stepped forward. She swept her right hand in front of her, and presto, a wand appeared in her hand. Jack knew that when she waved her arm, she had simply allowed one of the hidden wands to slip from her sleeve. The cymbals crashed, the crowd cheered. Annie grinned triumphantly and bowed. While Annie was distracting everyone, Jack casually put his hat upside down on the velvet tabletop over one of the hidden trapdoors. As he set the hat down, he pressed on the trapdoor and it flapped open. "Thank you, Amazing Annie," Jack called. Annie handed Jack the wand and he stepped back and waved it around the brim of the top hat. The crowd grew quiet. In a deep, mysterious voice, Jack intoned, "Zoom Bali Windu Chi Gon Hey," which means, "Oh, marvelous hat, what do you have for me today?" Jack tapped the hat, stepped back from the table, and turned to Annie. "My dear, may I ask you to check my hat, please?" he said. "I have a feeling it holds a surprise." There was a drum roll as Annie slowly reached into the hat. Jack knew she was pushing down on the top of the hat, which also had a secret flap. A small white rabbit suddenly leapt from the secret compartment, through the hat, and into Annie's arms. The orchestra played triumphant music, and the audience cheered. 2 more rabbits jumped out. Each time Annie caught the rabbits and pretended to be surprised. The cymbals crashed, the audience laughed and clapped. Annie handed the rabbits to Hank and Butch, who carried them off stage. Then she took off her own hat. "Ladies and gentlemen," she shouted, "as you can see, my hat is as empty as my brother's was." She showed the inside of the hat to the audience, but it also holds wonders. There's Jack and Annie with the bunnies coming out of the hat. You like bunnies?
I've had a baby one before.
A baby bunny. Annie set her hat on the table beside Jack's, carefully placing it on top of the second hidden door. "Oh, I'm going to need another wand," she said. This time she swept her left arm in front of her, and presto, the second wand appeared in her hand. As the crowd applauded, Annie waved the wand over her hat. In a strange voice she said, "Zoom Bali Hula Hula Hi Ho Hey," which means, "Oh, wondrous hat, send new friends our way. Jack reached into the hat, pushed down on the secret flap, then gently lifted out a dove. As the crowd cheered and clapped, he reached in again and took out the second dove. Jack handed the birds to Annie. They perched on her fingers as she lifted her hands into the air. The birds flapped their wings, bowing to the audience. The cymbals crashed. The crowd cheered and clapped. While Annie distracted the crowd with the birds, Jack scooped the deck of cards off the table and stepped into the shadows. Behind his back, he divided the deck equally. Then he hid the two halves in the palms of his hands. Annie gave the doves to Hank and Butch. Then she turned back to the crowd. "I believe my brother has something to share with you now," Annie shouted, "Jolly Jack." Jack took Annie's place in the spotlight. "Are there any card players in the house?" he called. Many in the audience raised their hands. Some laughed loudly and teased each other. "Well then, my friends," said Jack, "my strong advice to you tonight is never play cards with a magician." As he spoke, he secretly gripped the edge of the card stack in his right hand. Using his thumb, he expertly inched the top card up until it was just behind his fingers. All the while, Jack kept talking. "But oddly, some folks are foolish enough to challenge me to a game. Therefore, I never travel anywhere without a deck, but I prefer my cards to remain invisible until I'm ready to use them." Jack then raised his right hand and flipped out the card, pretending to pluck it out of the air. The audience gasped. What does it mean to gasp?
Like, sort of like a sigh, but like an excited,
Can you gasp for me? Like that. Perfect. I lost my place. Okay. "Of course, you can't play a card game without only one card," Jack said. He reached into the air with his left hand. "Oh, good. Here is another, and another, and another." The drummer pounded his drums each time. Jack appeared to snatch a card from the air. He produced card after card. "What's this? Another? Another?" Finally, he said, "My goodness, I seem to have gathered an entire deck. Who wants to play a game?" The cymbals crashed. The crowd cheered and Jack bowed. Annie stepped into the spotlight, holding up 3 large rings. "Once upon a time, in a palace in China, we learned the ancient art of magic rings," she said. Jack knew that one of the rings had a tiny opening in it. Annie hid the opening between her thumb and index finger so no one could see it. "There are 3 solid rings," Annie told the crowd. "There is no way on earth to link them together." She banged the rings against one another, making a show of trying to fit them together. Each time she failed. Jack stepped forward. "But deep in the palace of the emperor," he said, "a Chinese sage taught us a magical song." Jack waved his wand over the first ring and sang, "Hong, hong, hong, hong." Annie banged the rings together again. This time she slipped the solid rings through the hidden opening in the other ring. Her hands moved so swiftly, no one could see what she was doing. "Once again, the magic song has worked," she shouted, holding up the 3 connected rings. Cymbals crashed. As the crowd applauded, Annie easily disconnected the rings. Then she tossed the 2 solid ones high into the air. When they came down, she caught them so they slipped perfectly through the tiny opening of the 3rd ring. Annie held up the connected rings, and the orchestra played triumphant music. As she bowed, the audience clapped and cheered wildly. Jack joined her in the spotlight. "You have been most agreeable and welcoming tonight," he shouted. "We will think of you fondly for years to come. But now we must leave you. During intermission, you can prepare your minds and nerves in anticipation of the most amazing escape artist of all time, the great Houdini." Trumpets sounded, everyone cheered and stomped their feet. Jack and Annie bowed with a flourish. They raised their top hats to the crowd. Then, laughing and waving, they ran off stage, and the curtain came down. There's Annie with the magic rings that she put in the air.